Would you tell me your name, please?
You are starting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My name is Guta Blass Weintraub. My maiden name is Blass and my married name is Weintraub.
Where were you born?
I was born in Poland, in a large city, second largest city called Lódz, Lódz.
In what year?
It was January 22nd, 1924.
Would you tell me about your family and growing up in Lódz, please?
Well, basically my life was, as a child, was sheltered and beautiful. And I remember only wonderful things about my childhood. I had very caring and wonderful parents. My father was a very educated man, and he had a factory of uniforms, sort of like for soldiers, or like Boy Scout uniforms also, and like preparatory school uniforms, and we were slightly upper middle class family, basically fairly well-to-do. I had a younger brother, and we had a very good life. We used to go, my brother went to a Jewish private school where they learned Hebrew and so on. We went to a private kindergarten. I went to a regular public school, which was only Jewish, because this is the way the system was in Poland, that the Jews had their own schools, and the Polish people had their own school. And the reason for that evidently was that the Polish people were not going to school on Sundays, and we did not go on Saturdays. So it was like basically helping us not to be sacrilegious and so on. So it was good, and we felt good about it. Of course, as far as anti-Semitism is concerned in Poland, I, as a child, could notice things quite a lot. I occasionally would notice or hear that someone Jewish was beaten up, or that something, a little shul, which was a small little synagogue, that was vandalized or burned or so. Those were little things, and my parents tried to shelter me from it, and for me not to, grow up with a complex of these things. But I knew of it. When I was growing up, children, Polish children my age, some let me know and would say something bad, "You damn Jew," or something like that to me. But the majority did not, because maybe children did not to such extent understand anti-Semitism or practice it as the elders did. So that was it, and I don't know what else I can tell you. Life, in my opinion, was beautiful, and to me, of course, I know that there were people of lower financial class that maybe did not have it so good in Poland, but they were also people upgraded as far as the financial situation and so on is concerned, and they most probably had even a better life. But I I don't know. I know it existed, but I have not experienced it. We used to go every summer. We used to have a summer home. We used to spend our summers there. And a funny thing happened. I visited Poland 2 years ago, and I visited all those places. It was a very emotional journey for me. Of course, I still feel like it isn't enough. I would like to go back and see more of it because I spent a short time in these places and so on. So maybe I will do it someday again. And then the first year, I started going to high school, which was a private and only for Jewish girls. It was a girls' high school. And like I said, private, but unfortunately it did not last too long because the Germans entered my city in September 1939. Of course, we still went to school for a couple of months, and but as time went on, the Germans started occupying buildings that like school buildings, offices, government offices, and so on, and they settled themselves in our school. They only used the third and second floor, and we had the first floor for us, but it became dangerous because we had to use the same bathrooms, and on some occasions we have heard that some girls were abused by the soldiers. So for that reason alone, the school was closed. It would have most probably lasted for another month or so, but it was too dangerous and it wasn't worth it. And so I stopped going to school.
What was life in Lódz like right after the German occupation?
Well, right after, now, first of all, I would like to describe the entering of the Germans and slightly prior to it. I have heard that the war started with Germany, and of course all the soldiers were going toward the German borders to defend Poland. But it seemed like they just simply turned back and they were running. A day or two prior to the entrance of the Germans to Lódz, the Polish army, without actually having, without fighting, ran back, and they were passing through our city, and they were passing through our street, and they were heading somehow toward Russia, running away. I will never forget that day because what we did, we were preparing sandwiches and food, and we were giving it to the soldiers as they were going toward Russia. The population of the city remained. There were some that foresaw what was coming for some reason, that also ran to Russia. Many of those survived, and they escaped concentration camp and camps. But for a family with children, it was difficult to run away. So basically, who ran away as young women and young men that were unattached, and majority of them survived if they could survive the winters in Russia. And later on, of course, the Germans practically were near Moscow. And of course the Jews were running away, and Jews at that time somewhat were persecuted by the Russians also. So, but it still was evidently much easier to survive than to go on to camps and concentration camps where a majority of the people perished in gas chambers and so on.
Okay. Oh, the Germans have entered Lódz.
Yes.
What happened to you and your family? What did you do?
Okay, we stayed there until about the beginning of December, actually. And at that point, my father thought that it was too dangerous to stay in Lódz, that there were talks about making a ghetto in one part of the city where the poorer people, where the poorer Jewish population lived, and they were going to push everybody in there. And since my mother's hometown was a small town called Wierzbnik-Starachowice, and my mother still had relatives living over there, we thought that it would be easier for us to get there, and we were hoping that the Germans would not be able to follow us. I mean, it was just a dream but they followed us, but a lot later. In the meantime, we were still able to exist as normal people without being thrown into a camp and so on.
How did you exist? How did you live in this town?
During that time, well, we did not take much with us, whatever we could pack on a wagon. And of course the journey on the wagon from Lódz to Wierzbnik was very unusual too, because we had to hide, and we had to sort of pretend that we were not Jewish. And the way we were doing it is, my father used to live during World War I in Germany for some reason. I don't understand why. He was born in Poland, but he lived for some time in Germany, near Hamburg. He spoke a perfect German, as a matter of fact, a German with a dialect, which is very unusual, because if a foreigner speaks a German, he will not speak with a dialect, because it's very difficult. So he spoke with a dialect, and I learned German in school, and I also was able to speak with father some German. So we were able to sort of make believe that we are either of German descent or mixed Germans, which they sort of kind of, were lenient with them. And we arrived to one city where a German family, well, actually not all, also mixed Germans hid us for a day or two until we were able to continue by wagon to Wierzbnik. And since it was winter time, it was a very difficult journey, because the roads were not cleared of snow, and the wagon was slipping and sliding, and the horse was tripping, and it was a very bumpy and bad trip, very cold and so on. But finally we arrived to Wierzbnik, and after a little while we lived for some time with relatives. But later on we were able to rent an apartment for ourselves, and we lived. So we had a sewing machine on the wagon, and my father was a designer. I don't know if I mentioned that to you, but he was designing military clothes for the army before the war. He was also designing sportswear, also Boy Scouts uniforms and for preparatory school uniforms. So since he had the knowledge of making patterns and able to understand how to do things and so on, and I somehow always liked to sew. So we were doing some sewing. Father used to make the patterns and doing things like that. And I, under his instruction, would sew the garments, and we were able to make some money to sustain ourselves. Of course, all we needed at that time was just to buy potatoes and bread. That was our daily food, whatever we could make with it, because meat was very scarce, and if there was any meat, the Polish people would get it. Somebody that had influence, in other words, people that grew up in the city and so on, knew the natives, the Polish people in the city. They were able to sort of obtain other staples of food and so on. But since we were strangers, things were a little bit more difficult for us. Later on, I decided that I will open up a little kindergarten and take care of small children for still working parents, because it was not a ghetto yet in the city, and we were just restricted as far as the time is concerned now. In other words, we were not able to get out of our houses before a certain time, which I imagine was 7 o'clock in the morning, and we had to be in our homes at 5 o'clock. But, of course, people still continue working and so on. There were a lot of tailors, shoemakers, and merchants in the city and whatever else, just like it was before the war. So they continued to serve the community and so on. And the kindergarten that I opened was in my own home, which was consisting of one large room and a kitchen. Excuse me. But usually we would clear the room and push the furniture back and then accept the children at 9 o'clock. And I would take care of them until 1 o'clock, and that helped the family survive, because the kind parents of the children would occasionally bring some articles of clothing or extra food that they were able to get, like meat and things like that. And they were paying me a certain amount of money. And I was doing it with another friend of mine who was the same age. We were about 16 at that time. Unfortunately, this young lady was killed by the Germans later on. So this is how we tried to sustain ourselves during the time until the ghetto was formed, and until they took us into a work camp.
How was the ghetto formed?
Well, the ghetto was still not terrible by comparison to a work camp or concentration camp. In other words, we were still sort of free, but we have to abide by the rules of the Germans. But we were moving around freely in the area of our confinement, and we were still together, which was the most important thing, my parents and my brother and I. And we our lives were still sort of normal because we were able to get together with friends, with relatives. And amazing thing that all through our confinements in the ghetto or in a work camp or even in concentration camp is the fact that we were, the Jewish population always had a sense of wanting to learn, of wanting, wanting to have knowledge. So we did not stop. So in the ghetto, we were, like for example, I was teaching young children in kindergarten. Someone else who had a little higher education than I was teaching me. Of course, we all had to pay. And I remember I was taking algebra and continued with my German, although I spoke German well, but I needed to improve it in writing and so on. And I even took Latin, I took French, and we were able to get together and sing Hebrew songs. And so it was important because we were still together. We were not torn apart, and therefore life seemed to be normal. It was very, very special too, because we valued each other much more than it made us think. Although I cannot say that we valued each other more, we just understood it better, because family ties were very close among Jewish families in Europe, and ties with friends and relatives were also extremely important. And that was what was sustaining us and making our life bearable. That we did not have the comfort, we did not have the opportunities, we did not have a million things that we had before, but it did not seem to matter.
Okay. Under what circumstances and when were you taken from the ghetto into a work camp?
Okay. I will never forget that the morning. Usually there were no announcements from the Germans of their plans. They usually did everything totally unexpected. If anything ever leaked out, it was either a gossip or it might have been some truth, or the times did not correspond. So, but we heard of other people being transferred to different cities, and there were many people that were transferred from small little towns near Wierzbnik-Starachowice into our town, and they were all put into the ghetto, and things were getting tighter and tighter because we had to share our little room and kitchen with another family and another family. And we realized that it will not last like that forever, that things were getting worse. And of course the food situation was getting worse because of the incoming of so many people from other cities. So we prepared ourselves. Like, for example, we made knapsacks for each one separately and had them packed with the essential clothes, and my father, whatever little money we had, distributed the money amongst all four of us that way, that if we were separated, that we should have the money to be able to help ourselves. Anyhow, so basically we were prepared. We were not able to take any extras because we knew we couldn't carry it. So we left our household goods, our silverware, even a photo album, which was so dear to us, we had to leave. But I managed to stash away some pictures in a bag and kept it hidden. And sure enough, what happened is a few days later, at 4 o'clock in the morning, the Germans at the same time knocked in all the doors. The reason for that was that they did not want us to have the opportunity that one should find out, hear from the other, and have a chance maybe of escaping. So at the same time, they had hundreds and hundreds of Germans with dogs knocking in people's doors and screaming, out, out, rouse, rouse. So many people, if they were not prepared, as we were at that time, ran out with basically nothing. And then they ran us all together and gathered us on a marketplace. Each small city had a marketplace. That was, usually cities in Europe had this point that was called a marketplace. So we were all rounded up there. And at some point, they had Germans doing a selection. Right, left, right, left. So what was happening? They were selecting younger and stronger people to remain in the city, and they were distributing them to those 3 camps that were located in the city. One camp was a woodwork camp where they were cutting wood, and before the war, I imagine they were making furniture. But during the war, the Germans confiscated it and they transferred it for their war purposes. So this particular camp was manufacturing boxes for ammunition. They were manufacturing stretchers for the soldiers and other things that were helping them for their war purposes. Then there was a camp nearby in the nearby city called Starachowice, where they had a steel factory, and all the Jews were ordered to work in the steel factory, also manufacturing things for the war. And the camp was nearby the factory, and they were over there. And there was also one other camp. I don't know what specific purpose this particular camp had. And they started selecting. My father, my mother, my brother, and I were standing naturally together. When they came to us, when one of the Germans came to us with a dog and with a big switch that they used, for beating horses when they were driving carriages, and he wanted to separate us, my brother and I. They left in the line, and my father and my mother, they pushed in the other line. That means they were going to go to a concentration camp, or, instead of going to the work camp. Um, Someone who was, they had Jewish policemen in our camp, in our ghetto, actually, to keep order amongst us. And they were evidently helping the Germans keep order during this ordeal of selecting the people. So one of the policemen was a very good friend of my father's from school, and he realized what was happening, and he came running and took my father and my mother out and put us together. My mother at that time must have been maybe 36, 35, something like that. My father was a couple years older, so they were not old, but this is what they were doing. So temporarily we were staying together. Later on, what happened is the same policeman, Jewish policeman, had a son also who was my brother's age. And at that time, he found out that the Germans who were stationed outside of the city in houses that they confiscated from well-to-do Polish people needed boys to do their cleaning, shoes and whatever else they needed them to do. And this policeman thought it was a good idea and safe for my brother and for his son to go over there. And he explained it to us, and they took my brother and his son away, but we were not frightened because we knew that they were going to be safe, which was true. So my father, myself, and my mother were taken to the woodwork factory. And and one part for women, one part was for men. So I stayed with mother, and of course we were the ones that made the beds, the bunk beds and so on. And I was working too. And we were all at that time being given food that was cooked for us by a group of people that they selected, and they were cooking for all of us, for the men and for the women. So it wasn't too bad. When I think about it, and the reason I say it wasn't too bad, because I'm still comparing with the times to come. So we were able to survive because we were receiving bread, we were receiving soup once a day, and in the beginning I was working in the gardens. They had gardens over there, which there were some Germans on the grounds of the camp that needed to supply with vegetables and whatever fruit was growing and other things. So I was working in the garden. Later on, in the winter, of course, there was no work in the gardens and so on. So I was working in the factory, supplying the and so on, and other evidently and that they somewhat. And one day he came to our home, which was, the place where we already lived separate. But it was on steps from the street going into our apartment. And he heard evidently of my father, and he came to us, and he asked my father if he could make a one-piece suit for him with a zipper, and then he requested many pockets. And, I will mention again that that was before they chased us out to the marketplace, before going into the woodwork factory. So, and he explained to my father that he wanted pockets inside that they wouldn't show on the outside, that he wanted some pockets on the outside because he didn't explain that he wanted to hide things, but we knew. And we did that, and he paid us well. And he was a very, very handsome young man. He was older than I at that time. He must have been maybe 21 and maybe 22 or so. I don't exactly know. And he was very handsome, and he came in and he sat on the couch and he explained to my father all this, and he was sitting with a sack of apples. And he was eating those apples one after the other, and I looked at him in amazement. First of all, we didn't see apples. We were not able to obtain apples. And he evidently got them. He was always able to manage things. He was very, how to say, uh, innovative, yes. And he always how to or how to obtain it. So, and remember that every day connect think whenever it sounded too good, because we didn't trust him. Then also there was a horrible incident during my time in this camp, and there was a group of people that was really very sick and delirious with fever of the typhus, and my mother was among them. I had no knowledge of the fact, and I had no understanding of the fear of being infected with the illness because of my mother, because I wanted to be with her and I wanted to help her. Therefore, I didn't even think of it, and I was the only one that was assisting all these sick people. Unfortunately, the doctor himself got ill, and he was among them. And there was also a brother-in-law of my future sister-in-law that was there. And I mean, I knew all these people. And without thinking, I offered that I was going to take care of them. I took care of them. My mother came out of it. Many other people survived. What I was basically doing is helping them to sponge when they were hot and perspired and feverish. And I was also trying to feed them, which was helpful. And of course, all of them most probably would have survived. But after releasing my mother and some others, there was a small group left, and this German was terribly impatient, and he didn't want to wait any longer. And he said, these people are going to be taken away to a hospital outside the camp. Well, there was no hospital that I knew of, but we believed him. He said it was a temporary shelter or a hospital that we were going to, that they're going to be taken care of. Well, we were ordered to make stretchers. We had to carry the stretchers. I myself, with the other party, carried the stretchers of one person. And, but we did not go to a hospital. They took us straight to the graveyard, Jewish graveyard, where there was a big ditch dug, and they told us, you know, the people could not walk. They told us to the people, you know, like edge of the ditch where they could simply shoot them and kick them in. And this is what they did. And we witnessed that. Later on, I will tell you of the fact that I went to Germany to be a witness, and I apprehended the German who was instrumental in shooting all these people. But then this camp was
This point, we need to